Good morning, Hotep African family. Welcome once again to the Building the Lighted Temple Wisdom Service. And for the purpose of the recording, I am Dr. Nteri Nelson, a metaphysician, clinician, and educator, and co-founder of the Academy of Kemetic Education and Wellness. And again, delighted to be spending this glorious Sunday with each and every one of you. As we begin for today, I want to just greet each one of you and start with, let's see, just say good morning, Hotep. This is the Building the Lighted Temple Wisdom Service, where we come together in the midst of these troubled times. We enter into these ethereal waters, this universalizing vibrational field, this etheric space that we are cultivating, this virtual space where we can amplify our vibration and distribute the light. And African family, this is liberated space. So just one new NU apostrophe S update. Again, the Kaaba class will be meeting this Wednesday, November 17th. Paula says, I see Paula, Grand Rising, beloveds. Yes, Grand Rising, everyone. Grand Rising, Paula. So our class, our Kaaba, our second class will be this Wednesday, November 17th at 7:30. Look forward to seeing each and every one of you who are part of this class, and encourage others to join us. And Horace, welcome, Hotep to you. All right, so let's dive in. This service last week was entitled Healing and the Forgiveness Process, the Kemetic Metaphysics Tree of Life. And today we are continuing in that same spirit, with our title being Healing and Forgiveness and the Forgiveness Process. Healing and the Forgiveness Process, Personal, Purpose, and Planetary History. Because what we want to do, family, as we look at healing and forgiveness, we want to open the lens to the widest angle that we can substantially reach, the widest angle that we can substantially touch and reach, in order to glimpse the scope and the depth of what is in need of healing and forgiveness. Yes, family, we want to open the lens to the widest angle in order to glimpse scope and depth in which one's suffering may be placed. What is that widest angle? Then we want to stand in this place and use it as a vantage point in which to view suffering and resentments and gain greater perspective of who and what needs healing and forgiveness. All right, so we really are going to be looking at a micro level of healing and forgiveness process, and we will look at a macro level of healing and the forgiveness process. And just to recap, beloveds, last time we talked about, because where do we draw our guidance from? We're drawing from our primal wisdom. So just briefly review, we looked at the teachings of the Ptah Hotep. This is one of the oldest books in the world of literature, published again approximately 2388 BC. During the 5th dynasty under King Massa, Nesubiti Massa. And the key teaching or instruction we are working with is found on page 29, in which he says, again, if you are angered by a misdeed, then lean toward a man on account of his righteousness. Pass over the misdeed and don't remember it, since God was silent to you on the first day of your misdeed. So family, we went in length at each one of these last session, and the video is up, so please refer to that for more unpacking of this instruction by Ptah-hotep. But at that time, we did look at this whole meaning of the word misdeed. And this can be understood as a, at one level as a misstep or misdeed, but on its grandest spiral, it can be understood as the misappropriation of energy, and at its most debased use, it can be evil, misdeed. Then we look at our African history, our primal wisdom, and in the Pertimru, and our instruction in the 42 laws of Ma'at. One of which we are looking at is, I have not been angry and wrathful except for a just cause. So how have we been moving in this white supremacist paradigm, wherein anger would naturally arise at the injustices that have been witnessed and observed and experienced? And today, foremost family, we're going to be diving deep into this next instruction of primal wisdom by our beloved ancestor, George G.M. James, and who talks about resentment and how, in order to be an initiate in the mystery school, and this is listed in his book, and I have given out these instructions, the 10 virtues, that number 7 says that in order to be an initiate in the mystery schools, one has to have freedom from resentment when under the experience of persecution and wrong, known as courage. So how is one cultivating this courage to be free of resentment? And just briefly, beloveds, I went more into detail last time, so this is just a quick review. The video is up from last time. We learned that, anger and resentment hang out together. I mean, anger can be fleeting. Someone took your parking spot and you got angry, and next minute you forgot it and you moved on to something else. But anger can turn into resentment, and resentment is a strong feeling of displeasure. And it is a sustained experience that churns into a bitterness as one perpetually dwells on woundedness from past events. And then I went into some other definitions of resentment. The Psychological Association, American Psychological Association, gives this as bitterness, animosity, hostility elicited by something or someone perceived as insulting or injurious. We also looked at the opposite of resentment, its antonym, because this also gives us perspective on balance. And the antonyms, some of which are, first and foremost, is the word satisfaction. And we understand that word from our Kemetic teaching of Hotep, to be satisfied. Satisfaction is the state that we desire. It is the state that is our natural inheritance. Hanging out with that is contentment, delight, gratification, happiness, pleasure. So resentment moves us out of the state of Hotep, or peace, but contentment that we talked about. And so we are looking now, as we enter into part 2 of healing and the forgiveness process, how are we working to recalibrate ourselves to a state of contentment versus resentment? And resentment can be a sustaining feeling, which can blot out peace. And we have also been learning, family, that we must use the law of repulse to restore peace. And as we move on along a continuum of contentment to resentment, we have to use the law of repulse to reestablish our balance. And again, what is the law of repulse? It is the law, when used, harnesses the will to dissipate misappropriated energy that energy misappropriated at its lowest, most potent to base level is Isfet, that which would disrupt unitive consciousness. Unitive consciousness is our natural state, our divine inheritance. So we must use this law of repulse to repulse that which would disorder or disrupt that. Now, and please, family, do put your questions. We had just wonderful questions each time we have meet, and please, in that spirit, put your questions in the question and answer. So to accomplish the aim today of looking at scope and scale of what may be considered a micro level of healing and the forgiveness process, and what is at the macro level of healing and forgiveness, we want to look at the micro and the macro by looking at the life briefly, because he had a very full life, so we look briefly, but as an example, the life of Malcolm X, to give us an example of that micro level of healing. And then we want to move to the macro level in which we will be looking at the work of our ancestor, George G. M. James. So on that micro level, family, what does this look like? Well, when we want to talk about and work through healing and the forgiveness process, we start with what's personal, what feels personal. And, as a clinician, in working with folks over 3.5 decades, work with folks on these differing levels. First and foremost, folks will come in, and because there's a personal injury or woundedness or that which needs to be worked through. And on the personal level, one may need to work and really work through issues around having, for example, a father that was an alcoholic, and the suffering that the family experienced as a result of that, and being impacted by that, and the trauma of that. That alcoholism could have contributed to domestic situations and irresponsibility around finances, and so such that the family didn't have the resources it needed. So that is a place and a space where there is a tremendous need for healing and the forgiveness process on the personal level. And in a moment, we will look at some of those personal levels as it relates to Malcolm X. Then we want to move to understand healing and forgiveness as it relates to the life purpose. Because when we move to this next level, we want to understand, family, that even though these things are happening on that personal level, on that life purpose level, the soul is ever wise, and it chose to incarnate in your family. It is the portal through which your soul chose to make its appearance. And the soul is ever wise in choosing that circumstance that will lead to its next steps in its unfoldment. So we want to look at that level. One may have come through a portal where they were forced to be in a caregiving role or in a protective role, so they might have come into a family where there were very few resources. And on this life purpose level, we also want to look at a certain point at one's natal chart there to see how their life purpose is connected with the circumstance that they chose to incarnate in. in the families that they came into. You know, one might incarnate and find themselves in a caregiving role because adults aren't being responsible, and yet this is part of their soul work and service to, and they have come into a circumstance that calls that out of them, even from early childhood, to look out for their siblings, to look out for their mother, to look out for their father, et cetera, et cetera. So we look at the reason why the soul has chosen this family, this circumstance in which to incarnate. Then thirdly, we're going to look at the planetary history. And to do this, we must turn to the works of George James, who gives us just a planetary prescription for who and what needs healing and forgiveness. We have to look no further than what he has given in his book, entitled Social Reformation Through a New Philosophy of African Redemption. And let's visit here a moment with the word redemption. He will go into this meaning, but when we just look up a dictionary definition of redemption, we come to definitions such as retrieval, recovery, reclamation, repossession, recoupment, return, rescue, honoring, fulfillment, and finally, again, family, the word satisfaction. So we'll look at how all of this comes together. And let me just take a peek over here and just see, all right, we are 18 here, wonderful. All right, we're in listening mode. I don't see any questions yet, and everyone just greeting everyone. Okay, all right, so let me come back here. So on this micro level, we will be looking at some aspects of the life of Malcolm X, and with reference sources from biography.com and Britannica.com, and the biography of Alex Haley on his life. So just aspects of his life, but with the idea of pointing out what in who might need forgiveness and healing in his life. So we're looking at the personal level, and then we will proceed to his purpose level. In his early life, so Malcolm X was, as many of you I'm sure know, was born May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. And he was born to Louise and Earl Little. His father was a preacher who was also an active member of a local chapter of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and an avid supporter of Black nationalist leader Marcus Garvey. And so we learn as we go further that due to Earl Little's civil rights activism, the family was subjected to frequent harassment from white supremacist groups, including the Ku Klux Klan and one of its splinter factions, the Black Legion. In fact, Malcolm Little had his first encounter with racism before he was even born. So as we begin to think about healing and the forgiveness process, just start to think about what is impacting Malcolm on a personal level. He says, quote, in the works of Alex Haley, who interviewed him extensively for this biography, he says, "When my mother was pregnant with me, she told me later, a party of hooded Ku Klux Klan riders galloped up to our home. Malcolm later remembered, brandishing their shotguns and rifles, they shouted for my father to come out of the house." Now just imagine how terrified you would be even in the womb at this occurrence. But he goes on to say the harassment continued when Malcolm was 4 years old. All right, so the Klan didn't go away. The harassment continued, and when Malcolm was 4 years old, let's stay with that first incident a minute, because when babies are in the womb, things are impacting them. The fear that the mother had, this is an impact that the developing child can and will experience. The water's not being quiet even in the womb. But it goes on to say that the harassment continued when Malcolm was 4 years old and local Klan members smashed all of the family windows. And to protect his family, Earl Little moved them from Omaha to Milwaukee in 1926, and then to Lansing, Michigan in 1928. However, the racism in the family the racism the family encountered in Lansing proved even greater than in Omaha. Shortly after the Littles moved in, a racist mob set their house on fire in 1929, and the town's all-white emergency responders refused to do anything. So family, just imagine this child and the impacts and what's brewing in his heart, what is informing his experience in his family on a personal level. And so he says, it goes on to say that Earl Little moved the family to East Lansing, where he built a new home. So, I mean, this is a family that's still trying with all its might to strive in spite of what, and this is surely building strengths within Malcolm, but this is part of his experience. We then go on to learn that when Malcolm was 6 years old, his father died after, he was a former supporter of the Marcus Garvey, as I've already said, died after being hit by a streetcar, possibly the victim of murder by whites. So there's speculation as to how he died. And then, so you think about the impacts to Malcolm at age 6, learning of his father's death. And then the impacts don't stop there. Malcolm's mother never recovered from the shock and grief of her husband's death. And we learned that the surviving family was so poor that Malcolm's mother, Louise, resorted to cooking dandelion greens from the street to feed her children. You know those dandelions we see on the grass that we pick? Resorted to feeding this to her family due to the poverty level they were suffering. His mother suffered an emotional breakdown, which she never recovered from, and was committed. But the losses don't stop there. In his family structure, Malcolm and his siblings were sent to foster homes or to live with family members. So this breaking up of the family. But we go on to learn that Malcolm excelled in school, but then again, here comes more impacts for the psyche of Malcolm. When he told an 8th grade teacher that he wanted to become a lawyer, and then she said that he should become a carpenter instead. And this is a point where it just was so crushing for him. He lost interest and soon ended his formal education. So he's later described as a rebellious youngster, and who then came to live in our Roxbury, which is down the street. Paula, I know you're on there, and some others who are more local, to the Roxbury section in Boston to live with his half-sister Ella. But it is here that he became involved in criminal activity, and then was later And so we need to look at that in terms of healing and the forgiveness process. Is this a place where Malcolm would have had some regrets? Because these are the things that can be heavy and make the heart like lead on the scales of my art as well. Some things he had done. Was there any regret in wrong in his deeds? And so so just consider healing and the forgiveness process as it relates to this one life. And so while he was in prison for robbery, which was from 1946 to 1952, he underwent this conversion and joined the Nation of Islam, as many of you know, and so now he spent long hours reading books in prison in the library and memorizing the dictionary, and so he was now under the influence of this Islam and this Black nationalism movement. So now we start to see Malcolm X's life purpose, just like each one of us has a life purpose. We have our childhoods and whatever happened there, but then we we move into our life purpose, and our life purpose is even informing where we incarnated in the first place. So as we look from this widening angle, we just start to gain perspective of, okay, how do we approach this healing and forgiveness process on these different levels? So as we begin to look at his life purpose, after his release from prison, Malcolm helped lead the Nation of Islam during the period of its greatest growth and influence. And he met Elijah Muhammad in Chicago of 1952, and began organizing temples for the nation of New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, and cities in the South. So he founded the nation's newspaper, Muhammad Speaks, which he printed at the basement of his home. So you see him really coming into his fuller soul work and service and purpose. And he articulated the nation's racial doctrines on the inherent evil of whites and the natural superiority of Blacks. So this is where he begins in his making his way. And he was the minister of Temple number 11 and in Boston, and Temple number 7 in Harlem, the largest prestigious temple in the nation. And after the Chicago headquarters. And then there is this recognizing of his talents and ability by Elijah Muhammad, who had, as it's stated here, a special affection for Malcolm. So if you think about Malcolm not having his father killed so early in his life, the importance of his father figure in his life, and yet what may come later shaping that as well. So it is said that Malcolm X gave voice to, this is so key, family, resentments of African Americans. And we read here that he was an articulate public speaker, a charismatic personality, and an indefatigable organizer. Malcolm X expressed pent-up anger, frustration, and bitterness of African Americans during the major phase of the Civil Rights Movement from 1955 to 1965. Now imagine being a voice for that pent-up anger and frustration and bitterness of African Americans for a decade, from 1955 to 1965. And what might have Malcolm X been undergoing in his heart, what, in terms of even doing the work of transmuting any of this coarse substance, not only his own, but for a nation of African American people. Just think of the life, work, and purpose that he is performing and what is required of him in the heart, according to our primal wisdom, that he can even take this on in his heart, to be a voice of it, and to be a voice to the point and place where this even costs him his life. He was also criticized. He also criticized the mainstream civil rights movement of challenging Dr. Martin Luther King's central notions of integration and nonviolence. So you see in the life purpose, the life purpose of one who is meeting up with the life purpose of other. And what is it on this grander, this macro level, are each called to do? How do we see the larger scope and scale of healing and in the forgiveness process, so we can even understand the respective work of each of these men and their mission, their purpose, to which they both gave their life for. Malcolm urged his followers to defend themselves by any means necessary. So there's certainly a differing approach here, and our African wisdom says we have a right to be angry and wrathful for a just cause. So both men were at work for a just cause. Their means and methods were respective to them, as our means and methods are respective to us. We have to sort out what we are doing in that life purpose to be in accord with the laws of Ma'at, to do as Ptah Hotep is instructing us in our deeds, and to work through that anger for a just cause, channel it. How are we to go about it? But as we move on, we learn that there were Malcolm X learned that there were that Elijah Muhammad had fathered children by 6 of his personal secretaries, and he was devastated by this. We read that he was devastated by learning of this, and we further read that there was a rupture with Elijah Muhammad, which proved to be much traumatic. So the things that traumatize us get different. What traumatizes us traumatizes us. And in 1963, Malcolm X became deeply disillusioned when he learned that his hero and mentor had violated many of his own teachings, most flagrantly by carrying on many extramarital affairs. So how to sit with all of this in the heart, And then we go on and learn that, Malcolm had these feelings of betrayal, combined with Muhammad's anger over what was described as Malcolm's insensitive comments regarding the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And this led Malcolm X to leave the Nation of Islam in 1964. So here we are with the life purpose and the accumulation of what may be resentments or strong feelings of betrayal or disillusionment or anger. And then we go further to see that that Malcolm went on to do a Mecca, a pilgrimage, and in that pilgrimage he had what is called a second conversion, and which led him to renounce the separative beliefs of the nation. He claimed that the solution of racial problems in the United States lay in Orthodox Islam. So when we have to let go, when feel that loss or mourning of, because what we've learned doesn't fit what we're coming into now, there's that accumulation in the heart of grieving. How do I let go of that former belief and now embrace this instead? And so he goes on, in 1965, he founded the Organization of African American Unity as a secular vehicle to internationalize the plight of Black Americans and to make a common cause with people of the developing world. In other words, to move from civil rights to human rights. So there's a shift in his purpose, just as there was a shift in Dr. Martin Luther King's purpose. We see that too. He began to see things on a more global scale. But the hostility between Malcolm and the nation continued, and we learned that there were death threats and open violence against him. So we learned finally, family, that it is on February 21st, 1965, that Malcolm was assassinated while delivering a lecture at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. And 3 members of the Nation of Islam were convicted of the murder. Now, the last word, the final version of that is still to be determined in terms of those discoveries. Just like to this day, the question is who killed Kennedy? So we'll leave that to those who are doing that research. But family, what I want to do now is shift to this planetary history, this macro level. But I want to just see if there's any questions first before we go. There's 19 of us. Welcome, everyone. All right, so we're in listening mode. I'm just going to continue here. So, beloveds, this brings us to the work of George G.M. James and his prescription of what and who needs healing and the forgiveness process, which he calls social reformation through the new philosophy of African redemption. And what I want to do is I want to share my screen with you at this point so we can see and read his work together. I trust everyone can see this. So I want to go back to the beginning. So this is chapter 9. And this, beloveds, is where we pull back to the widest lens. Family, you're hearing it here, that we are making a tremendous stride in striving against much resistance now with the 1619 project, with our beloved scholars really bringing this work to the forefront with much resistance. The critical race theory bringing this work to the forefront with much resistance. And think about the resistance and even talking about enslavement. But family, our brother, our beloved George James has given us the prescription that takes us back to the primal source of where our work of healing and forgiveness needs to be eventually placed. We need to stand in this greater sphere of and scope and depth of healing, things that happen back here that then inform what happens on that at that 1619 project level, informs what would happen in the streets, in our public schools, in the civil rights movement, and so on. And so let's just dive in with George James. And I just want to read some of his words here as we go along. He says, now that it has been shown that the philosophy and the arts and sciences were bequeathed to civilization by the people of North America and not by the people of Greece, the pendulum of praise and honor is due to shift from the people of Greece to the people of the African continent, who are the rightful heirs of such praise and honor. What has it meant for us to be absent praise and honor in our lives? What has that subtraction meant for us? He goes on to say that this is going to mean a tremendous change in world opinion. Well, we're at these turning points, family, and in world opinion and attitude for all people and races who accept the new philosophy of African redemption, i.e. the truth that the Greeks were, and so our African ancestors teach us we must teach the truth, right? That's our charge. The truth that the Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the people of North America would change their opinion from one of disrespect to one of respect for the Black people throughout the world and treat them accordingly. So he's laying out this macro prescription of healing and forgiveness. We may be drilled down here with the hurt and pain that, let's say, our father was alcoholic and he mistreated the family, or our mother wasn't there for us in certain ways, or we were the victim of physical or sexual abuse, or didn't have opportunities in school. We see today these privileged families paying and bribing top universities to get their kids into school. We see the things that have been happening behind closed doors that are, now that this isfet, this evil is being externalized, that's been happening all along. We're just seeing it in broad daylight. So he goes on to say, it is also going to mean a most important change in the mentality of Black people. This is George James back in 1954. A change from an inferiority complex to the realization and consciousness of their equality with all the other great people of the world who have built great civilizations. We are reeling from our mental impacts. And George James saw that back then. With this change in the mentality of the Black and white people, great changes are also expected in their respective attitudes towards each other and in a society as a whole. So our attitudes toward white and Black and towards each other, our attitudes towards intra-racially toward ourselves. He goes on to say that in the drama of Greek philosophy, there are three actors who have played distinct parts, namely Alexander the Great, who by an act of aggression invaded Egypt in 333 BC. All of this is laid out in the earlier chapters of his book. So we're in the last chapter, which is the prescription. and ransacked and looted the royal library at Alexandria, and together with his companions carried off a booty of scientific, philosophic, and religious books. Egypt was then stolen and annexed as a portion of Alexander's empire. But the invasion plan included far more than mere territorial expansion, for it prepared the way and made it possible for the capture of the culture of the African continent. And pardon me, family, that I didn't highlight that. Capture and the culture of the African continent, because the invasions with the Spain and Portugal on the West Coast, the incursions, the Papal Bull, it just paved the way. So we have to go back to then come forward. He says, this brings us to the second actor, that is the school of Aristotle, whose students moved from Athens to Egypt, or Kemet, and converted the royal library first into a research center, and secondly into a university, and thirdly compiled that vast body of scientific knowledge which they had gained from research, together with the oral instructions which Greek students had received from the Egyptian priests, into what they have called the history of Greek philosophy. So Aristotle goes in and researches the books, sets up a university, and so on. In this way, the Greeks stole the legacy of the African continent and called it their own. And as has already been pointed out, the result of this dishonesty has been the creation of an erroneous world opinion. Look at as you ponder your own life purpose, under which we labor under this erroneous world opinion as informing our working purpose to make a course correction. The world opinion that the African continent has made no contribution to civilization because her people are backward and low in intelligence and culture. This erroneous opinion about the Black people has seriously injured them through the centuries up to modern times, in which it appears to have reached a climax in the history of human relations. There are those who are storming public school meetings, school hearings, meetings, talking about and pushing back against teaching any of the history of 1619, of critical race theory. And there is likewise that voice that says we need to be pushing back against teaching our kids lies, the untruths that have been perpetrated. And now we come to the third actor, and that is ancient Rome, who through the edicts of her emperors Theodosius in the 4th century AD and Justinian in the 6th century AD abolished the mysteries of the African continent. Now this is where we are studying and steeping, family, to be back in those mystery schools. That is the ancient culture system of the world. The higher metaphysical doctrines of those mysteries could not be comprehended. The spiritual powers of the priests were unsurpassed. The magic of the rites and ceremonies filled the people with awe. Kemet was the holy land of the ancient world, and the mysteries were the one ancient and holy Catholic religion whose power was supreme. This lofty culture system of the Black people filled Rome with envy. Now, of course, this is registers in the heart and is the work of the heart. And consequently, she legalized Christianity, which she had persecuted for 5 long centuries, and set it up as a state religion and as a rival of the mysteries, its own mother. This is why the mysteries have been despised. This is why other ancient religions of the Black people are despised, because they are all offspring of the African mysteries, which have never been clearly understood by Europeans and consequently have provoked their prejudice and condemnation. And these are heavy labored emotions that they need to be transmuting: this prejudice, this condemnation, this envy, this hatred. In keeping with the plan of Emperors Theodosius and Justinian to exterminate and forever suppress the culture system of the African continent, the Christian church established its missionary enterprise to fight against what it has called paganism. Consequently, missionaries and educators have gone to the mission fields. Now, when you think about mission, you can see a correspondence with mission in let's say purpose, life. This has been their mission and purpose. So consequently, missionaries and educators have gone to the mission field with a superiority complex born of miseducation and disrespect, a prejudice which has made it possible for them to accomplish the blessings which missionary enterprise might otherwise have accomplished. So there can be this other meaning of mission and purpose. For this reason, missionary enterprise has been responsible for a positive injury. In other words, what a white supremacist paradigm thinks is its life purpose or mission has been responsible for a positive injury against African people, which consists of the perpetual character of African culture in literature and exhibitions which provoke laughter and disrespect. Just think about this family when we think about life purpose and this missionary enterprise that is happening today in the public schools, this characterization happening in the media. This missionary enterprise is continuing in this moment, even in which I speak and in which we have convened. This then is only a brief summary of the parts played by the persons of the drama of Greek philosophy and the resultant effects upon the Black people. This drama might be called the causa causarium of the social plight of the peoples of African descent, because it has made the white and Black races not only common victims. And that's where we have to show up to realize that this has victimized both oppressor and oppressed. This has victimized both. There is not truth telling even around who is even injured. We have to tell the truth around what and who needs healing and forgiveness, what and who is injured, and injured at a soul level. One may have amassed much wealth on a material level and not know or sense injury here. But when we assess on the soul level, the tremendous magnitude exists therein, because it has made the white and Black races not only common victims of a false racial tradition about the African continent, but also partners in the solution of the problems of social reformation. So this partnership has not revealed itself fully formed as of yet. I believe that a reformation of this kind is possible if the best minds of both racial groups cooperate in its accomplishment. Both groups have been the common victims of miseducation. But Europeans don't think so. They don't see it, right? Both groups have been the common victims of miseducation arising from a false tradition about the African continent, and it has caused them to develop attitudes according to their common belief. The white people, a superiority complex, and the Black people, the corresponding inferiority complex. So you can see the rebalancing, recalibrating that needs to take place. And if we are to accomplish a reformation in race relationships, it is obvious that both racial groups must combine their efforts in the abandonment and the destruction of that mentality which has plunged the Black people into their social plight. So do we see the willingness of both racial groups to combine in this effort? He says, this I suggest should be done by a worldwide, now here we are with critical race theory and Project 1619, but George James is opening the lens wide, not just here, 69, but wide. He says, this I suggest should be done by a worldwide dissemination of the truth through a system of re-education in order to stimulate and encourage a change in the attitude of races toward each other. In combining their efforts, both races must not only preach and teach the truth that the mystery system of the African continent gave the world philosophy and religion and the arts and the sciences, but they must see to it that all false praise of the Greeks should be removed from the textbooks of our schools and colleges. So consider that feeling. For this is the practice that has blindfolded the world and has laid the foundations for the deplorable race relations of the modern world. The name of Pythagoras, for instance, should be deleted from our mathematical textbooks in geometry, wherein the theorem of the square and on the hypothesis of a right-angled triangle is called the Pythagorean theorem, because this is not true. So this must be struck from the math books. We must point out to the world the deception in attaching the authorship of Socrates to the precept of man, know thyself. Our African ancestors in the language of Medunetia inscribed in the temple say, "Rek jes," know thyself, "Rek jes." And attaching the authorship of Plato to the 4 cardinal virtues. And so our African ancestors gave us 10, and in this same spirit where they take only a piece or a part, only 4, like of the 42 laws of Ma'at, taking the 10 of the 10 commandments. We can't build the world on a piece or a part, we must build in wholeness. And since Socrates obtained the self-knowledge precept from the Egyptian temples where it was used as an inscription, and Plato reduced the 10 virtues of North African mystery system to 4, we must also prove to the world that the doctrines of the so-called Greek philosophies originated from the ancient mystery system of the North Africa. And that's why, family, each week I emphasize that we go to the primal source. We cannot heal on a derivative, a piece or a part, a synthetic version, a diluted dispensation of, but we go to the primary source. It says, I'm going to take the questions in a moment. This proof has been set forth in chapters 5 through 8 of Stolen Legacy. In order to carry out our worldwide crusade, we must recommend Stolen Legacy for adoption and study in the schools and colleges of both racial groups and in our fraternities, sororities, and interracial groups, in order that young and old of our present generation might all get to know the truth and be able to pass it on to future generations. He says, this, I believe, would be very helpful method by which this process of re-education would become universal and effective in the creation of a much needed racial reformation. The white people of our modern age cannot be regarded as wholly responsible for social conditions which are the result of false racial tradition. It is this that makes race relations a challenge to the best minds of both racial groups to combine their efforts in its solution. And he makes, this is why whites will presently will say, well, I'm not responsible for what happened back then. So it does involve the best minds of both racial groups to combine in the efforts to find solution. But our disturbed race relations have also another cause. This, I would say, is both supplementary and intensive. For the false traditions about the backwardness of the African continent, created by Alexander the Great and Aristotle's school, has been dramatized by, now this is back to the missionary literature. We all had we're reading missionary literature today. We read missionary literature in school. Malcolm was fed missionary literature when he was told he should be a carpenter instead of a lawyer. Missionary literature and exhibitions as the will of Roman empires and as a source of laughter and disrespect. Just think about the humiliation and the disrespect. The brutality is burning your house down, your property, being killed on the tracks, as Malcolm X's father was. But just think about the laughter and the disrespect, how we have had to do the work of transmuting these humiliations. He says, there is no doubt that this policy has created bitterness and dissatisfaction in the minds of natives who have been compelled to question the sincerity of the missionary. In the meantime, missionary enterprise gains the sympathy and support of a miseducated world in order to carry on its program, create the harm, and then go back in and be the one to be the hero and rescue. This crazy paradigm just has to have an end put to it, which our beloved lost his life for teaching us, leaving us this prescription for the world. This is our world. 1619 is a beginning, is a huge step in this direction, and yet the full force of all the African contribution must be revealed. We can, and what we can do to eradicate this second and more subtle evil, the dramatization of false tradition, so as to make it appear true. I mean, that's the key here, this making things appear true. He says, I suggest that since the missionary dramatizes false tradition because he himself also believes it, we should combine our efforts, first of all, in re-educating him so that he might know the truth and change his superiority complex, which is responsible for his mistaken policy. I mean, Malcolm has tried to do this. I mean, how far do each and every one of us feel we are doing in this effort as part of informing and intentioning our life purpose, this re-education? His re-education should not only consist of a thorough study of the ideas and arguments contained in my book, Stolen Legacy, but he must also be given special training in the language, customs, and ideals of Africans. I mean, that sounds a lot like the cultural sensitivity training that they were trying to give police officers, et cetera, that's gotten shot down. In order to make him cultivate an attitude of respect for the culture of African people, seemingly the oldest specimen to have been developed by mankind, because that continent is the birthplace and the cradle of the ancient mysteries. With a world enlightened as to the real truth about the place of the African continent in the history of civilization, false tradition and belief should cease to be effective. Disrespect and prejudice should tend to disappear, and race relations should tend to be normal and peaceful. And then finally, family, he says, this brings us to the final problem, the problem of African redemption. The aim of Stolen Legacy are not only to stimulate a reformation in race relations and scientific research, but also to cultivate race pride in the Black people themselves and to offer them a new philosophy of African redemption as the modus operandi of achieving racial reformation. So he states the principles. This new philosophy of redemption consists of a simple proposition as follows. The Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the Black people of North America, the Kemites. Now, in order to explain the value of this proposition, 3 questions must be asked and answered. A, as a simple proposition, what is its significance? Its significance lies in the fact that it is a statement of an important truth, which is the exposure of Greek dishonesty. So that's where we're at, family. You know, whatever, what your head, heart, hands, and feet find to do as part of your life purpose, your reason and meaning, you're stepping into this wide angle view somewhere along this whole scale and scope of sightedness to be a part of this reformation. Its significance lies in the fact that it's a statement of an important truth, which is the exposure of Greek dishonesty. B, why is this proposition called a philosophy? A philosophy is an accepted belief, and this proposition is a philosophy because it is offered as a belief worthy of acceptance. What is a philosophy of redemption? So here we are, family, and we're going to get close because we're getting close to the time now, and I did want to take a question there. A philosophy of redemption is not merely an accepted belief, but a belief that is also lived in order to enjoy the benefits of its teaching. This proposition will become a philosophy of redemption to all Black people when they accept it as a belief and live up to it. This brings us to our final question, and that is how to live up to this philosophy of redemption. In other words, how should Black people work out their own salvation? How are we living up to this? From the outset, my readers and co-workers in the solution of a common problem must be reminded that our philosophy of redemption is a psychological process involving a change in belief or mentality to be followed by a corresponding change in behavior. So we're working with those mental matters. That's Sebek in the tree of life, that false imaging that's in the waters of Osset. It really signifies a mental emancipation in which the Black people will be liberated from the chain of traditional falsehood, which for centuries has incarcerated them in the prison of inferiority and world inferiority complex and world humiliation and insult. This mental emancipation or redemption, it must be remembered, has 2 functions. It is general when, on the one hand, the phenomena of our unwholesome race relations is regarded as a general problem, needing a general emancipation of both races in order to effect a solution. In this general sense, emancipation transcends the limits and boundaries of race and therefore include the whole world. This is where we're moving, beloveds. It's a planetary effort. White and Black people, since we are all victims of the same chain of the traditional falsehood, that has incarcerated the modern world. On the other hand, emancipation or redemption is specific when we refer to the efforts, to the effects of the phenomenon of unwholesome race relations upon the Black people. It is freedom from such conditions that constitutes the specific function of emancipation or redemption. Let me just see how much, okay. So in the interest of time, I want to leave us with a little cliffhanger and finish that reading next time and pick up there as we go back to the personal level, because we're going to now, family, we seeing the whole scope and scale, and we're going to move from the personal in terms of healing and the forgiveness process to your life purpose, because, you know, we chose as a portal to come through our family, our community, our our soul is seeing in its wisdom, the unfoldment of its next steps. So let me take this question. Let's see, 2 questions here. I'll stop the share and we'll. All right, and because we're just going a little over here, I don't like to do that. Not because there's not lots to do and say, but because we have places to go and people to see and things to do. So we get a potent dose and then we make our application in our daily living. Baba Haru says, African diaspora have missed a step in the dance, which has caused us never to want to leave our kidnappers, but to love them still to the today. Yes. Yes, there is some step there for sure in this dance that where we're needing to be very much about the work of our reformation, and yet tarrying and lingering. Yes, as you say in this dance, Baba Haru. And I'll skip down here a minute. I'll go back to Wesley. Martha says, emancipate yourself up. I have to look in the chat. She says, realizing, let me go back to Nikki. She says, but Dr. Nteri, I don't want to re-educate them, laugh out loud. It feels so draining, and it's oftentimes met with such resistance. I often fight to not give up on the white race because I know there are a select few that are ready to join forces. How do I combat these feelings of anger and annoyance? Beautiful. So well expressed, beloved. So well expressed. And I can imagine there is not many or one among us who haven't felt the same, and at some point or another. And yes, how to find that balance, how to seize a moment where one could be educated, but first one has to educate themselves, because these have been well-kept secrets. People have died, including our beloved George James, have died trying to reveal these secrets to us. So we first have to know, and then we have to find those moments when we feel best to impart, because it can be a drain, especially when whites are resistant to, they're superior. They think they're superior and they know, and so there's this resistance. So you see, beloveds, I want us to see the scale, the scope and scale under which we labor. So we're not just down here being angry with our loved one because let's say they they, you know, we can have a cold measure of disappointment or anger or resentment or bitterness when we have a loved one who, let's say, went to prison. But at the same time, we have to look at this in terms of a larger scope and scale. You know, imprisonment on a physical level, and then the imprisonment on a mental level. And you know, we can be angry with our family because they couldn't buy us the clothing we wanted, or the sneakers, or you know, our emotions can get so misplaced, and so and it's only when we reach a certain awareness and maturity that we're able to take more into consideration, because so often, no matter what traumatic events will bring people in on a personal level, as they step back, they're able to say, you know, my father did the best he could, my mother did the best she could. They're able to move into some forgiveness and healing and understanding based on the widening of the scale that they begin to understand. So yes, Nikki, excellent. Yes, we're all wrestling with how well you worded that. And then Wesley says, how can Eurasians heal if they do not recognize themselves as sick? Excellently expressed. Or if they see their sickness as necessary for the propagation of their culture. Yes, and you know, and they themselves term that, this is one of their phraseologies, the white man's burden, you know, to civilize us, the uncivilized, you know, like, you know, it's such a burden that, you know, they, and they don't see themselves as sick in taking on such a lie in order to justify their actions. We have a quandary, family. You know, there's no shortage of work for all of us to do. There's no shortage in our life purpose in all of us to do. The harvest is aplenty and the work is a few. But we have to understand the scope and scale of what it is we're even up against. You know, how Wesley is posing this, how Nikki is posing this, how Lester Haru is posing this. Just look at the complexities of what it is we grapple with, and then we're trying to sort out our own healing and forgiveness. You know, well, how do we scale, and how do we scope, scale, and see what is the work of the heart? You know, this can feel, and just think of all that we've transmuted in the heart, and all that, you know, is still coming. And then Linda says, many of our people are resistant to, so how do we deal with them? Yeah, excellently expressed. Our people don't, I'm not African. They'll say, well, I'm American. They'll say, why are you bringing that up? Why are you, I don't want to go to, they'll say they don't want to go to Africa. They're an American. And so the struggle to educate those around us and to insulate ourselves from being impacted by those who aren't willing to learn, who have never been willing to learn, who are another generation of those who wanted to have this superiority in privilege and denial of our contribution. Here we are yet with another, and now in the schools, we're up against this same course, running its course. Unless we, with the 1619 Project and critical race theory and all the other efforts that have been made all along the way, continue to educate the world and change this paradigm. And let me just, so I got the questions. Let me come back to the chat. We went a little over. And then Horace says, and let me just make sure there's no one in front. Oh, Paula, let's see. Oh, Celine, wow. Okay. I bet it. All right, but we're gonna go a full 15 minutes over. I hope everybody doesn't mind too much, and we won't, as for the most part, make this a practice, but when we're on a roll, we better seize the moment. So well expressed, Nikki. Martha says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Yes, Bob Marley. Yes, oh, yes. And Martha, you'll have to come on when we do the go to meeting and say more about music and the use of music in that emancipation process. Because everything is teaching. Bob Marley is teaching, the songs are teaching. And Horace says, how do we who are striving to heal and forgive on a personal level, great, achieve so now we're looking at things in levels, and this is how we learn. The tree of life moves us to see a roadmap, and so we just have to find ourselves and locate ourselves. This is not all. We're not going to crumple into a ball in bed, so depressed and distraught because of something that's happened in our family, as an only explanation as to why we feel what we feel, because that in of itself is imprisoning. Imagine Malcolm X being at 6, or just the devastating sense of abandonment and loss of everyone on his landscape, and then at one point even the house was not even intact on the landscape as it burnt. What happens to us when we witness these things on a personal level? How do we work these things through in the heart? So Horace says, how do we who are striving to heal and forgive on a personal level achieve our goals after so many of those you have mentioned today have been martyred in the name of truth? Oh my goodness. I want to keep all of this, how profound the questions here. You're just taking it to the core, to the depth, to the marrow, to the bone. Yes, how do we do all this? And then even if we strive to be a Malcolm, we strive to be a George James, we strive to be Dr. Martin Luther King, we strive to be a Stephen Biko, we strive, then in this martyrdom, in the name of truth, we could be killed. How do you find peace in this? How to find peace? And so, beloveds, you are just really naming, you're just really in a very profound way, just capturing what could be said. And here, let's see, and then and so back to the chat here. I hope I don't miss anyone. Let's see. All right, go back to Sue. Personal level. All right, and then Paula says, I think she had to log off. She says, hope to have a discussion about this next week. Thank you so much. Yes, and we're going to do a Zoom next week so we can discuss all of this, because it's, yes, we will do it. And Salim says, we always talk about the miseducation of the Negro, but I never really thought about the extreme miseducation that Europeans go through. Keeping us both ignorant allows for this dynamic to continue. Unfortunately, most Black folks won't want to reclaim their history until white folks start telling them to. Yes, and you know, these can be sad truths that when when white folks think something's of value, then we come to think it's more of value. And this goes back to that ever bantied around saying that the white man's ice is colder. You know, why when you go in the store you want uh, that ice and not to shop at the black keeper's store and buy his ice, because the white man's ice is colder. And so this is the mental chains we have to take off. And then he says there's more of trend on social media now where white influencers will discuss the immense contributions that Africans have made to the world. I don't think anyone likes those people, though, ha ha. And these are very important points, because when white authors have, like Black Athena and other texts have written about Black Genesis by Robert Duvall, you know, when they have written, there's been all this traction that goes there. But you know, fortunately, African people are showing up for George, in numbers, some numbers for George James and the John Henry Clarks and the Sheikh Anta Diops and the Dr. Leonard Jeffries and so forth and so on. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And then Paula says, perhaps the stars were not aligned for our martyrs' work to take place while on earth. Thank you for the ancestors. Thank you to the ancestors. They left their knowledge for us behind. We love them. It's our time now. Also beautifully expressed, Paula, and we'll talk next week. And Horace says there's their erroneous belief system, white man's burden. Yes. And Doug says, excellent class today. Kathy says, most people are still in an illusion. Yes, Kathy, for sure. Rosa says, today I started the second day of Kwanzaa preparation for my community in Brazil. The testimony of two parents was their kids are coming back from school desiring to be white. And Rosa, Rosangela, I want you to come. Let's talk about let's just have more discussion for next service. But following that, I want to have you come on as guest and talk about Brazil and what your observances there. You say testimony of two parents was their kids are coming back from school desiring to be white. Still so much work to do in our community to restore African dignity. Excellent, excellently expressed, everyone. Wow, just wow, just amazing. We went way over today. We do it when necessary. We don't make it a pattern just to be talking, but we talk to and express what needs to be said. Rosa says, yes, Rosa, we're going to have you be a special guest and talk about Brazil, because that's to see how it's a global thing. All right, and so here we are. I'm back here, and whoo, you're on fire. You all are on fire. My goodness. To the core, to the marrow, to the fiber, you're taking it. And so on that note, we'll have more open in the meeting next time to just share back and forth. And today, blessings to each and every one of you, and thanks to the ancestors for just an amazing class, an amazing discussion. And I say to you all, Om Puja Seneb, life, prosperity, and health. See you next week. Bring guests. We need guests. Bring more people. Share the guest pass. Encourage membership. This is how educate, each one teach one. Peace and love, beloveds. Shem Imhotep.